For more than 2 decades, Iran buried the most important machinery of its nuclear program inside a mountain near the city of Qom, because it believed that no weapon on Earth could ever reach it. And on the night of June 21, 2025, 7 American B-2 bombers proved that belief was one of the most expensive miscalculations in the history of modern warfare. The site was Fordow. The machinery was thousands of spinning centrifuges, enriching uranium roughly 80 to 90 meters below solid rock. And the thing that finally undid it wasn't a weapon designed to break through the mountain in the way you'd imagine. It was a weapon designed to treat that mountain as if it barely mattered at all. That's the part that changes how you think about all of this. Iran didn't just hide Fordow, they engineered the entire logic of their survival around a single assumption, that geography is a shield no conventional bomb can defeat. Osirak in 1981, the Syrian reactor in 2007, both destroyed from the air because they sat exposed. Iran studied those failures and drew one conclusion: go deep, go under stone, and let the planet itself become the armor. For 20 years that logic held. Then a 30,000-pound answer fell out of the sky, and the entire premise cracked open in a single night. It's now July of 2026, more than a year on the other side of that strike, and we finally have enough distance to see what actually happened down there, and what it quietly rewired about every buried bunker on the planet. This is Professor Alex, and if you want the analysis that goes past the headlines and into the mechanics, take a second to subscribe, because this next part is where it stops being a news story and starts being a lesson about power. Because the weapon has a name, and the name tells you the whole intent. The GBU-57, the Massive Ordnance Penetrator. 20.5 feet long, around 30,000 pounds, a steel casing so dense it can slice through earth and rock and concrete on gravity alone, sensing the layers it punches through and choosing the exact instant to detonate. The United States began designing it in 2004 for one purpose that everyone understood, but nobody wanted to say out loud. It was built for Fordow, not a category of target, that specific mountain. And it sat in the inventory for years, tested at White Sands, dropped from B-2s in trials, waiting. A bomb built for a war that hadn't happened yet. Here's what most coverage rushed past. The MOP didn't crack the mountain the way you'd picture it, with brute force smashing straight through 90 meters of stone. It couldn't. The physics won't allow it. Reinforced concrete stops most of its penetration inside the first 20 meters or so, and Fordow sits under limestone and hardened construction that would eat that number alive. If you dropped one MOP straight down onto the peak of that mountain and hoped it would tunnel to the enrichment halls, you'd be disappointed. The Iranians knew that. Their engineers ran the same math the Pentagon did. So how does a bomb that can't drill through the whole mountain still gut the facility underneath it? It cheats. It finds the seams. And Iran, without meaning to, built those seams itself. Every deep facility has to breathe. Centrifuges generate heat. Machinery needs air, tunnels need ventilation, and all of that means shafts, vertical channels running from the surface down into the working space below. Those shafts are the one part of the mountain that isn't solid. They're the crack in the armor that the armor requires in order to function. And when General Dan Kane stood at the Pentagon days after the strike and walked through what actually happened, that's the detail that reframed the whole operation. The B-2s didn't aim at the mountain. They aimed at Fordow's ventilation shafts. 12 MOPs on Fordow, 6 down each of 2 shafts. And they weren't dropped in a cluster all at once, hoping something got through. Each of the 12 had its fuse programmed individually. A unique impact angle, a unique arrival time, a unique final heading, choreographed like notes in a sequence. The first weapon in each group had one job: tear the protective cap off the shaft opening. The Iranians had tried to seal those shafts in the days before the strike, packing them, capping them, understanding exactly where their vulnerability lived. Didn't matter. The first bomb ripped the cover away and exposed the channel. Then weapons 2, 3, 4, and 5 poured straight down that open shaft, accelerating past 1,000 feet per second, driving deep into the complex before detonating inside the working space. Not against the mountain. Inside the room the mountain was protecting. And that's where the second piece of engineering did the killing. Because in a sealed underground chamber, the enemy isn't just the explosion, it's the overpressure. The blast wave has nowhere to dissipate. It rips through the connected tunnels, slamming into everything, and centrifuges are among the most delicate precision instruments human beings build. They spin at tens of thousands of rotations per minute on rotors balanced to fractions of a millimeter. You don't need to vaporize them. A shock wave rolling through the hall is enough to shatter cascades that took years to install. The Pentagon's own language was blunt about it. The primary kill mechanism wasn't fragmentation, it was overpressure and blast tearing through the open tunnels and destroying the hardware inside. The mountain that was supposed to be Iran's shield became the walls of a pressure chamber that amplified the very weapon meant to defeat it. Think about the strategic reversal buried in that sentence. Iran spent 20 years and untold fortune making Fordow deep. And the deeper you go, the more you have to seal yourself in, and the more sealed you are, the more devastating a blast wave becomes once it gets inside. The defense and the vulnerability were the same wall. That's the thing the GBU-57 was designed to exploit from the very beginning. It was never really a bomb that ignores mountains. It was a bomb built by people who understood that a buried fortress has to breathe, and that its breath is where you kill it. Now, and this is where the honest analysis has to slow down, because the internet did not. Destroying the hall is not the same as ending the program, and the year that followed turned that gap into one of the loudest intelligence fights in Washington. In the hours after the strike, the language from the top was absolute. Obliterated. Completely and totally destroyed. A spectacular success. And on the mechanical level, at Fordow specifically, the evidence largely backs a hard blow. The IAEA's Director General, Rafael Grossi, said it was extremely unlikely that any centrifuges at those sites survived, given how sensitive the equipment is and the size of the payloads that went off inside. By that autumn, independent imagery analysts were describing Fordow as heavily damaged, essentially dormant, the penetration holes from the MOPs eventually backfilled with soil, no rush to resume enrichment, the site quiet. Grossi's agency put it plainly in its formal reporting. Fordow was expected to have suffered very significant damage. But then, a leaked assessment from the Defense Intelligence Agency landed like a rock through a window. Its early read, low confidence, based on limited information, the kind of preliminary judgment that shifts as more data arrives, suggested the setback might be measured in months, not years. That some centrifuges elsewhere might have survived. That the lower structures at certain sites might still be functional beneath caved-in entrances. And suddenly you had two stories running in parallel. One where a mountain fortress had been gutted. One where a very loud strike had bought time and not much more. And the truth, as it usually does, settled somewhere in the uncomfortable middle. A follow-up American assessment reported by NBC found that of the 3 sites hit, one was mostly destroyed and set back hard, while the other 2 were degraded to a point where enrichment could potentially resume within months if Iran chose to push. Fordow was the site they were most confident about. That 2-year setback figure kept coming up for it specifically. So the mountain fell, but the question underneath the mountain never did. Where is the uranium? That's the ghost that has haunted this entire operation from the first morning, and it still isn't fully answered. Before the strikes, Iran held something on the order of 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, a stockpile that, further enriched, sits within reach of weapons grade. And there were 8 days between Israel's opening strikes and the American hit on Fordow. 8 days. Enough time, potentially, to move material out. Iran had told the IAEA it intended to invoke special measures to protect its nuclear material in the event of an attack, and then notified the agency it had taken exactly those steps. Grossi read that as a signal the material had been moved. American officials contradicted each other for a week, first suggesting the stockpile had been relocated, then insisting it stayed put through the strikes. To this day, that 60% material's precise location and condition remain, in the careful language of the assessments, uncertain. You can flatten every centrifuge in the country and it does not vaporize 400 kilograms of enriched uranium sitting in canisters somewhere you can no longer see. And knowledge doesn't sit in a building. This is the part that no bomb, however perfectly engineered, has ever been able to reach. The scientists still exist. The blueprints still exist. The 2 decades of accumulated expertise in spinning centrifuges and machining rotors and producing uranium hexafluoride, you cannot bury that under limestone and drop a MOP on it. Military force can erase infrastructure. It cannot erase memory. Every serious analyst who looked at this landed on the same uncomfortable conclusion. The strike delayed the program, degraded it severely, in some real sense set it back by a meaningful stretch of time, and it did not end it. Setback is not the same as gone. It never has been. Which brings us to the part of this story that was still being written while everyone was arguing about the first chapter. Because if you thought June 2025 was the end of it, the calendar has a grim answer for you. On February 28th of this year, 2026, it started again. A renewed American and Israeli campaign against Iran's nuclear and military sites. New strikes, new targets, sites tied to weaponization that hadn't been touched the first time. Places like Talagan 2, where imagery analysts studied the impact points and found them broadly consistent with what MOPs leave behind. And on that same day, Iran did the thing that should worry you more than any single crater. It shut the door, terminated IAEA access, disabled the surveillance cameras, removed the seals from its declared facilities. The most complete verification blackout in the entire history of the agency's monitoring of Iran. Sit with what that means, because it's the quiet consequence nobody puts in a thumbnail. The reason we could even have this conversation about how damaged Fordow was, the imagery, the inspections, the reporting on stockpiles, all of it depended on a thread of access that has now been cut. The world can watch the mountain from orbit. It can count the dump trucks and measure the backfilled shafts. What it can no longer do is walk inside and verify what's actually happening, where the uranium actually sits, whether centrifuges are actually spinning somewhere new. You strike a program hard enough, and one of the things you risk is convincing the target that transparency was a luxury it can no longer afford. Iran had plans for dispersal. It had a facility at Pickaxe Mountain that may be dug even deeper than Fordow, possibly beyond what a MOP can currently reach. And now it's operating in the dark, on its own timeline, with the watchers locked outside the gate. So was the GBU-57 the answer, or the beginning of a new problem? Honestly, it depends on which clock you're reading. On the tactical clock, the mission itself, the thing performed close to exactly as designed. It found the shafts, it cracked the caps, it drove into the halls, and the overpressure did what the engineers promised 20 years earlier. The Pentagon is already moving to restock its supply, finalizing a deal with Boeing worth over $100 million to replace the bombs it spent, and quietly racing to develop the next generation penetrator, because it already knows the current one has a ceiling. Iran's engineers had been pouring concrete rated far beyond what the MOP is certified to defeat, and Pickaxe Mountain is a reminder that the race between the fortress and the bomb that beats it never actually ends. It just moves to the next mountain. But on the strategic clock, the one that measures whether the world is safer, whether the program is finished, whether this bought a decade or a season, the answer is murkier and considerably less satisfying than the headlines from that first night. What America proved in June of 2025 was extraordinary, and it was real. That the era in which a country could dig deep enough to be untouchable is over. That buried is no longer a synonym for safe. That a facility 80 meters under rock can be gutted through the very channels it needs to survive. Every nation building underground right now, and there are several, took that lesson personally. The message wasn't lost on Pyongyang or on anyone else who thought depth alone was a strategy. And yet, the uranium's whereabouts remain a question mark. The scientists went home. The knowledge persists. The inspectors are locked out. A second campaign is grinding on into 2026, precisely because the first one didn't finish the job in the permanent sense the language suggested. The bomb that doesn't care did everything a bomb can do, and it ran headlong into the oldest truth about weapons of this kind, which is that they are astonishingly good at destroying things and almost useless at destroying intentions. Here's the reframing I keep circling back to, and I'll leave it with you. Iran built a mountain fortress because it feared a strike. America built a bomb specifically to defeat that fortress. And the result of both efforts, after 2 decades of engineering on one side and a perfectly executed operation on the other, is a program that's damaged but not dead, a stockpile that's hidden but not gone, and a country that's now enriching in the dark, with the inspectors thrown out and its resolve arguably harder than before. The mountain lost. The bomb won, and the thing they were both fighting over walked out the back before the dust settled. So maybe the real question isn't whether America built a weapon that can reach any bunker on Earth. because it clearly did, and that changes everything about how the next war will be planned. The question is whether reaching the bunker was ever the same thing as winning, because you can flatten the room. You just can't bomb the reason it was built. This is Professor Alex. I'll see you in the next one.